I can't see why we couldn't have that here. In some parts of the world, in the former British Empire, there are remnants of the former opium registration system, which still exists in parts of India, especially in the northwest in Rajasthan, where people are registered addicts and can go to a place and get opium. I don't see a problem with that. So I think working these solutions out's not going to be easy. There's going to be a book published later this year from Transformed Drug Policy Reform Organisation in the United Kingdom. The book's called Blueprint, and it will go through all the details of how different forms of Plan B, how they could all operate. And I think we have to start having that kind of discussion now. It's not easy, but I think that's the only way forward.
Can I ask, has someone got the microphone up there? It's a bit hard to see. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. A question for Brett. Regarding the decriminalisation of drugs in places like Portugal, Brazil, and so on, looking at this as a purely social issue, how can we be sure that decriminalisation would be as successful in a country like Australia, which already has a massive binge drinking problem? And wouldn't the first step to decriminalisation be education?
Well, I think each culture is different, but I think what you can say is that there is no doubt that whatever the society, prohibition just does not work. That's because prohibition automatically leads to super profits, automatically then leads to criminal gangs, automatically then leads to corruption. I mean, that's the nature of prohibition. It does not work. So I don't think it matters whether that's Brazil, Australia or Portugal. But I think you're right about education. I mean, I think one of the problems with the criminal justice system is, in many respects, a good mate of mine in Melbourne who's a criminal barrister says, you know, we're not far away from the stocks in many respects in the criminal justice system. We're not. We still with social problems, treat them in a rather 19th century way. We put someone in a dock, we prosecute them, we go through this process, and at the end of the day, you know, we're really none the wiser about that particular individual and their needs and about the social harm that they may or may not have caused. So I think the real issue in the criminal justice system in relation to drugs is to essentially rip up the Drugs and Controlled Substances Act, because they're based on a fundamentally flawed policy of prohibition and heavy regulation, and to essentially move to, you know, as others have talked about here today, a harm minimisation strategy, police working with communities and working with individuals, courts moving more into areas like therapeutic justice, where you've got victims and offenders sitting around the table rather than the silly sort of formal processes that we have in the current system, which lawyers are so enamoured of because they make money out of it. You know, because they can run a 5 or 6 day trial when a matter could be sorted out in a therapeutic justice setting over a day. I think they're the sort of issues. In other words, it's a holistic approach that you've got to take to doing it better. But one thing I'm absolutely certain, we can do it a lot better than we are today, and we're already seeing that with the chink in the armour with drug courts.
Can I go over here, gentlemen?
Thanks. I'm embarrassed I've forgotten your name, but my question's for the All-American hero. I've watched a lot of crazy people on the internet, you know, truth movements, things like that, saying how much of the American budget and things is supported by the money that comes in from drugs. How much of the resistance to this change is because of this money, and is it legitimately the flow of money from drugs, and is that true in the Australian markets too?
I think it's absolutely true around the world. If you didn't hear the question, it really has to do with resistance to drug policy reform based on revenues that our criminal justice system accrues. And I would dare say that many, including my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, have become dependent, or if you prefer, addicted to that revenue stream. You start looking at those who oppose drug policy reform, at the top of the list would have to be drug dealers, because it will put them out of business. You take those profits and drop them down to some reasonably manageable level, they got to find some other line of work. Bad people and greedy people will find new ways to be bad and greedy. I don't think there's any question about that. But in the case, for example, of alcohol prohibition in my country, I know you have experience with that in this country, our 13 years of alcohol prohibition led to unprecedented levels of violence. Drive-by shootings using Tommy machine guns, overdose deaths in the form of bad bathtub gin. Essentially the same kinds of problems that we see today as a result of prohibition and drug trafficking. So I think it's safe to say that everybody who's making a profit is going to be opposed. Those whose budgets are essentially bolstered by drug enforcement money, they'll be opposed. We were talking earlier, our corrections officials, corrections officers are the strongest public union in the United States, bar none, certainly in the state of California. And we're now privatizing much of our prison life. Your system seems to be better than ours, but that's per diem. In other words, the more people you imprison, the more money your company makes. I think making profit off the criminal justice system, which deals with fundamentally with social justice, is immoral. So I could just say one thing before we run out of time. I'm here in part because of the good graces of an organization I belong to in the States that's becoming global, and it's called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I'll make my unpaid political announcement. If you have any interest in anything that we've been talking about, if you want to pursue, for example, membership in LEAP, go to leap.cc. We are growing our organization as we speak, and when you have frontline former drug lawyers and current warriors, rather, and past drug warriors basically saying, we know that this drug war has failed and we need an alternative, that's hard to argue with. We have arguments among ourselves, to be sure, but it's really hard, I think, to argue against people who have invested their lives on the front lines of the drug war saying it's bankrupt. It doesn't work.
One here, sir. Go. Going up.
Hello, I've got a two-part question. Number one is, if the media is the barrier between where we are today and where we want to be, what needs to change? And secondly, I question whether the media is the problem, because in recent history we see instances where the media and the public are on the same side, yet we have stubborn politicians who don't move, and things like the Sydney $5 billion metro and euthanasia are just two examples where politicians still don't budge despite the media and the public feeling a certain way. So is the problem not so much the media, but stubborn politicians who aren't courageous enough?
Well, I was going to say on that I didn't say all the media. I cited two examples, and I think they are particularly virulent examples of, and certainly I know in Victoria, Rob Hulls, the Attorney General, the Herald Sun hates him because he's a progressive, and they go after him. Any story they can get, these pathetic stories about, he's appointed left-wingers to the court, and I mean, it's just pathetic. But, I in fact said to a Herald Sun journalist once I wanted to write a piece in favour of Hulls, and they said, we don't like Hulls.